Here's a thing nobody warns you about winning. It's the most dangerous thing you can do. 31 days ago I was a zero in a line, so worthless the city was about to feed me to monsters for free. Today I'm the man who turned the cursed jinx into the woman who killed a saint on live broadcast, and let me tell you, beloved underdog and loose end somebody important needs handled are the exact same person wearing two different price tags. I used to be invisible. Invisible is safe. Invisible nobody schemes against because there's nothing to win. I traded it for famous, and famous, it turns out, is just a word that means now everyone knows exactly how much you're worth taking. So no, we didn't make it. We graduated. From prey too small to bother with to prey worth the bother. Since some of you are just joining the disaster, here's how we got here, and I'll tell it honestly because the honest version matters in about a minute. A month ago my swordswoman, Yuna, fought a saint on live broadcast and won. True sentence. Also a lie by omission, the exact lie the whole city's been repeating ever since. Here's what they leave out. Yuna had clawed her way into Grandmaster, real, earned, and still a full realm beneath the man she was about to face. On paper she had no business surviving him, let alone winning. She won anyway on the only seam he had. The Glassblade was undefeated, sure, undefeated the way a guillotine is undefeated. He'd ended every match in a single exchange, which meant that for all his rank, he had never once learned what to do in the second. So Yuna ate his first strike barely, bleeding, one red away from a corpse, and then dismantled him in the place he'd never had to fight. It was skill. It was also luck and a flawed champion and one impossible morning that broke exactly right. Ask anyone in the Gold Towers and they'll tell you it was mostly luck, a jinx, a fluke, a saint who couldn't fight past his own opening. And the worst part, they're not entirely wrong. You can ride one miracle. You cannot build on one. And every set of eyes that matters is already betting she can't do it twice. The lower district treated us differently now, which was its own kind of warning. A month ago Yuna couldn't buy bread without somebody whispering jinx. Now vendors waved off her coin and called her champion. Kids copied her sword forms in the alleys, and the same pit regulars who'd bet against her acted like they'd believed all along. Yuna hated it more than the contempt, if you can imagine. They didn't change their minds about me, she said, watching a shopkeeper bow. They just changed their bet. Exactly right, and exactly the problem. Adoration from below is sweet and completely worthless. The eyes that mattered weren't in the gutter cheering. They were up in the Gold Towers, quiet and still, recalculating. And one set of those eyes had already left a card on our table. The patron didn't send another card. She sent a carriage. Not literally, figuratively, it was a sleek black hovercar that cost more than the district, idling outside our dead little gym at dawn with a driver who looked like he ironed his own spine. The message was the whole point. I know where you live, I can reach you any time I like, and I'm being polite about it for now. Inside, a single line of silver text on a screen. You've had 3 days to decide who your potential belongs to. The trials of the upper houses begin this week. Come and climb, little host, or stay down there and wait for the Zhao family to finish what their boy started. The door is open. It won't be for long. I looked at Yuna. She looked at the car. It's a leash, she said. Obviously, I said. The interesting question is whether I can hold the other end of it. The patron wasn't wrong about the Zhao house, which annoyed me, because being right is supposed to be my whole brand. Word had already reached us through Mei Lin's web. The Zhao patriarch hadn't taken his son's public humiliation as a closed matter. He'd taken it as a stain, and he'd said the quiet part to his inner circle, that the leech and the jinx were to be corrected before the next cycle. Discreetly. Permanently. A 4-star heir losing to a gutter nobody is embarrassing. But a noble house that lets it stand is something worse, an invitation to every other gutter nobody in the city. So the Zhao family needed us gone, not for revenge, but for arithmetic. We were a number that made their whole brand look soft, and houses like that erase bad numbers. Staying small and hoping they'd forget wasn't a plan. It was just a slower way of agreeing to die. So I called a meeting of my entire empire, which fit comfortably around one wobbly table. Yuna, sharpening a blade that didn't need it. Tan, who'd brought serum and opinions in equal measure, Bao taking up 2 chairs and most of the air, Mei Lin, perched on the counter, already 3 moves ahead and charging me for none of them yet. I laid it out plain. The Zhao house wants us dead. We can't outmuscle a great house, not yet. But the patron just handed us the one door they can't follow us through, the upper house trials, where talent earns a patron's protection and a rung on a ladder the Zhao family doesn't own. We don't climb because it's safe. We climb because down here is a coffin with our names already carved in it. Bao cracked his knuckles. Tan sighed like a man who'd seen exactly where ambition ends. And Yuna, who'd spent 2 years being told to stay down, looked at me and said the only word that mattered. Up. Longhai isn't one city. It's about 9 cities stacked on top of each other, and the rent goes up with the altitude. The car climbed, and we passed through gate after gate, each a checkpoint where a guard scanned our papers, found a 0 where my awakening score should be, and did that little double take I've come to think of as my applause. Down at the bottom where we live, the air tastes like the reaping. A few tiers up, it smells like money. Higher still, it stops smelling like anything at all because people that rich pay to have the smell removed. Yuna pressed her hand flat against the glass like she was checking whether it was real. Everyone down there is looking up, she said. I told her that was the whole design. A ladder only works if the people on the bottom rung believe the top one is meant for them. It isn't. But believing is free, so the city hands it out by the bucket. And since we're talking ladders, let me give you the real one. The rungs the whole city is actually graded on, because up here it stops being background and becomes the only thing that matters. At the bottom, the stars. 1 through 9, the rungs an ordinary hunter bleeds a lifetime to climb. Past the 9th star the air changes, and you reach the first true realm, Grandmaster, where power stops being a number and starts being a kind of weather. Above that sit the ones the posters worship, and the gutter never meets saint, then demigod, and at the very top, a handful of war gods who hold the wall against the dark so the rest of us get to argue about rent. And every one of those realms runs deeper than its name. Early, middle, peak. A whole mountain folded inside a single word. Down where we started, nobody ever bothered teaching us past star, because a 0 and a jinx were never meant to need the rest. We were about to learn all of it the hard way. One face, one house, one price at a time. The trial grounds of the upper houses were built to make you feel small, and I'll give the architects this. They nailed the brief. Picture a coliseum that ate a cathedral. Banners the size of our entire district hung from pillars you couldn't have hugged with a search party. Everywhere, young talents in house colors pressed, polished, sponsored down to their boots, moved like people who had never once wondered whether they'd eat. And then there was us. Yuna's longcoat still had the pale square where they'd torn off her rank, a little blank flag announcing exactly what the world had decided she was worth. People noticed it. People always notice the empty space where a thing used to be. It's the one kind of nothing humans can't ignore. She caught a girl staring and didn't flinch. Let them look, she said. Good answer. In a room that expensive, being the cheapest thing in it is its own kind of disguise. The patron found us before we found our seats, which tracks because people like her don't get found. Up close she was worse than the rumors. Elegant the way a drawn blade is elegant, all clean lines and the promise of a bad afternoon. She looked at Yuna for exactly 1 second, the way you'd price a horse, then turned the full weight of her attention on me. The 0, the leech, the man with no number worth scanning. There you are, she said, like I was a parcel that had finally arrived. And then soft enough that only I caught it, hello, little host. 2 words. Host, not leech, not nobody. Host, she knew. Not guessed, not suspected, knew the way you know a card you're already holding. Every other person in my life thinks I'm a clever parasite riding a swordswoman's coattails. This woman knew there was a system, knew what it fed on, and had said so to my face in a crowd, smiling because she could. I smiled back. It's what you do when someone has just shown you they own the table you're sitting at. She walked us in like we were already hers, narrating the rules as though reading the terms of a loan I'd somehow taken out. The upper house trials, she explained, are a market dressed as a meritocracy. You compete, the houses watch, and the talent that shines gets bought, patronage, a seat, a name above yours that the likes of the Zhao family cannot touch, because a house does not poach from a house, not without starting the sort of war that ruins everyone's quarter. Climb high enough, she said, and the men who want you dead simply can't reach across the gap to do it. It was, I had to admit, a genuinely excellent leash, the kind that saves your life while it tightens. Then came the part she let hang in the air like a receipt. Of course, she said, protection isn't charity. You'll place under my patronage, and what you become while you climb. She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. I do my own math. The number she was leaving blank was all of it. Registration was a desk, a clerk, and a form that had clearly never once been filled out by someone with my qualifications, which is to say, none. The clerk typed in my awakening score, got a 0, assumed his screen had crashed, restarted it, got the 0 again, and looked up at me with the specific horror of a man watching a dog order coffee. "It's a leech," someone behind me whispered, and honestly, every time I hear it I enjoy it a little more, because it's the one slur in this city that happens to be true. I am the leech. I feed on other people's growth. The only difference between me and the people sneering is that I read the menu first. Mei Lin slid a stack of papers across the desk before the clerk could find the spine to refuse me. Credentials, sponsorships, a clean little fiction with all the right stamps, assembled overnight and billed to my future at an interest rate she promised to explain later. The clerk stamped it, and just like that, the 0 was in the bracket. The most expensive door in Longhai, opened with paperwork and gall. I'd met rich, spiteful young men before. Kang had practically been a tutorial boss for the species. Cao Rui was the same animal evolved. Where Kang ran hot, all flash and tantrum, this one ran cold, buttoned to the throat in dark House Cao colors, not a hair out of place, the kind of handsome that's been audited for flaws and found none. He didn't sneer at me. Sneering is effort, and I wasn't worth the calories. He just catalogued me: 0 awakening, borrowed swordswoman, forged papers, sorted, shelved, dismissed, all in the time it took to walk past. And that, more than any insult, told me exactly what he was. Kang wanted to beat me. Cao Rui couldn't picture a world where I counted enough to beat. He'd been handed an entire house at birth and mistaken the inheritance for a personality. Which is the one flaw money can't patch. A man who's never had to build anything has no idea what it costs to take it from him. You could find House Cao without a map. You just followed the gold. Their banner hung longest, their box sat highest, and their entrance moved through the grounds with the bored certainty of people who already knew the score because they did. Cao didn't enter talents so much as acquire them. Scouted young, bought cheap, polished expensive, stamped with the family crest like crates of premium fruit. Mei Lin rattled off the inventory in my ear, a dozen sponsored prodigies, 3 of them genuine monsters, and somewhere atop the pile a champion they hadn't bothered to show yet. You don't reveal your best blade at registration. You let the rumor of it do the cutting first. I looked at all that purchased excellence, gleaming and certain, and felt the old familiar thing settle in my chest. Not fear, appetite. A house that buys its power keeps receipts. And anything with a price has, somewhere, a buyer it didn't see coming. And then I saw the one they'd gotten wrong. She stood a little apart from the other Cao prodigies, in the pale colors of the house but somehow not of it, a young woman with a blade and a stillness the others were faking and she simply had. The crowd's eyes slid right over her, which was the first clue. The second was the collar, a stiff, high, gilded thing at her throat, beautiful and unmistakably a leash, the sort of ornament a house puts on an asset it owns rather than a person it values. A handler kept a hand near her elbow like she might wander off, or worse, decide to. By every signal the room was broadcasting she was unimportant, which is precisely the signal I'm built to distrust. I've made an entire life out of one observation. The most valuable thing in any room is usually the thing everyone's been trained not to look at. I didn't know her name yet. I just knew the house had mispriced her, and I am, at heart, in the business of arbitrage. Yuna's reputation had made the climb faster than we had. We hadn't been on the grounds an hour before a knot of house entrants drifted over to inspect the curiosity, led by a boy whose entire personality was his family ring. "The jinx," he announced, loud enough to share. "They let the unlucky one compete now. Bold. I'd worry about my own people standing near you." A month ago that word could put Yuna on the floor. I watch it land now and do nothing, no flinch, no heat, just those cold, pale eyes measuring him like a sum she'd already finished. "You should worry," she agreed pleasantly. "Bad luck's contagious. Ask the last man who stood across from me." Dramatic pause, eye contact. The boy laughed, but he also took a step back, and everyone saw the step. That's the thing none of them understood yet. Contempt is loud, confidence doesn't have to be. We didn't need them to respect us. We just needed them to keep underestimating us out loud, where it was useful. Here's the part the underdog stories skip. Revolutions are expensive. By that first evening, perched in the cheapest lodging the upper tier would rent to a leech, which still cost more than our gym did in a season, I sat down with the ledger and watched it bleed. Entry bonds, lodging tax, the voluntary sponsorship fee that wasn't. Tan needed reagents the local houses priced like they were rationing them on purpose because they were. Bao ate like a siege. Mei Lin's overnight miracle with the papers had a number attached now, and she'd attached interest to the number. Every door up here had a turnstile, and every turnstile wanted coin we didn't have. Yuna found me doing the math and asked how bad it was. I told her the truth, which I saved for emergencies. Enough to last the first round of trials, and not one copper past it. We hadn't climbed into safety. We'd climbed into a faster, more elegant way to go broke. Which meant winning wasn't the goal anymore. Winning was the only invoice we could afford to pay. That night after the math, Yuna didn't go to her room. She sat across from me cleaning a blade that was already clean, her version of pacing. For a while neither of us said anything, which between us counts as a long conversation. Then to the sword and not to me. Down there, when they called me Jinx, it was a whole city of strangers. Up here it's going to be people who matter, watching close, waiting for me to prove them right. There it was, the fear under the ice, the one she'd never have shown the woman she was a month ago. I could have told her she was the strongest blade in the building. True and useless, she'd have heard it as flattery, so I told her the real thing instead. "They're not watching to see if you're unlucky," I said. "They're watching because they can't work out why a leech bet everything on you, make them keep wondering." She looked up, almost smiled, didn't. But she set the sword down, which, for Yuna, is the same as saying thank you. The first trials format went up at dawn, and I read it the way other men read scripture. A bracket, open bouts, single elimination. The lower-ranked entrants fed in early so the houses could thin the herd before the matches that mattered. The board sorted everyone by awakening tier, which meant it listed Yuna near the bottom and listed me as, charitably, a clerical error. To the houses, it was a sorting hat. To me, it was a market with the prices printed right on it. Every entrant a line item, every matchup an odds table somebody had been kind enough to publish for free. The smart play wasn't to win quietly and climb. It was to win loud early, against someone the odds swore we couldn't beat, in front of the only people whose attention was worth anything up here. You don't introduce yourself to a room like this by being good. You introduce yourself by being impossible cheaply, on the first day, while everyone's still bored enough to be looking. People kept waiting for me to step into the ring, which never stopped being funny. Let me clear this up since it's the whole premise. I don't fight, I can't. I'm a zero, no awakening, no technique, a body that peeks at carries his own bags. I'm not the weapon. I've never been the weapon, I'm the armory. Here's how it actually works for anyone just joining. Yuna is bonded to me. Everything she earns through training and blood, every scrap of growth pays out to me as tribute, a quiet stream of stolen potential only I can see. And I can spend it, pour it back into her at the precise second it matters, turn a hair of an edge into a decisive one. She does the fighting. I do the investing. So no, I wasn't going to win this bout. I was going to stand at the rail, perfectly useless to look at, and win it anyway through her, on credit, the only way I've ever won anything. I don't win fights. I build dynasties. The fight is just where the dividends show up. Our first opponent was a House Min entrant named And I am not making this up, Brightspear, and for once the name was earned. A genuine young grandmaster, a House Min prodigy they'd been grooming for the cameras since he was old enough to hold a blade, which is precisely why they fed us to him. Here's how the bracket actually works. The house is seed by paper rank, and on paper Yuna was a washout dead bottom of the board, a revoked jinx. Whatever had trickled up from the lower city, a jinx who'd somehow put down a saint they'd long since filed under luck. A fluke. A trick. Certainly not a hunter who'd quietly clawed her own way to early grandmaster while nobody important was watching. So to the houses, this wasn't a contest. It was a grooming exercise. Throw the favored prodigy a cursed nobody in the first round. Let him look strong squashing her. Move the day along. Up in the high gold box, Cao Rui watched the matchup the way you'd glance at a coin toss you've got no stake in. He'd already filed the result. The prodigy wins. The jinx is exposed. The leech learns his place. Every soul in that arena had run the same arithmetic and arrived at the same comfortable, completely wrong answer. There is no leverage in the world quite like a room full of people who have all agreed, in advance, on exactly how the next 90 seconds are going to go. The bell rang and Brightspear came in like a man who'd never once been given a reason to doubt himself, fast, certain, expecting the fight to apologize for happening. And for the first 10 seconds it nearly did. He was quicker than Yuna, genuinely, measurably quicker, a clean sub-rank of polished House Min speed, and he spent it freely, driving her back across the sand, his blade everywhere, hers barely answering. The crowd made the satisfied sound a crowd makes when the world confirms what it already believed. Up at the rail, I watched Yuna take a cut along the forearm, watched her give ground, and let the room settle happily into the story it wanted. The jinx, losing on schedule. Good. Let them get comfortable, because Yuna wasn't losing. Yuna was doing the most expensive thing in any fight, taking the cheap hits and spending nothing, reading the exact rhythm of a man who'd won on raw talent so long he'd never had to learn what to do against someone who simply would not break. She was waiting, and I was watching the ledger, one precise withdrawal away from making him regret every easy win that ever carried him here. Here's the thing about reading a man. It hands you the one instant he's most certain of himself, which is the one instant he's blind. Brightspear found his rhythm, leaned into a combination he'd clearly won 100 matches with, and committed fully, gloriously, the way only someone who's never lost commits. That was the second. In the cold ledger only I can see, I had a reserve of tribute saved from a month of Yuna's blood and training, hoarded for exactly this and nothing else. I spent it. Not all of it, that's amateur. A precise withdrawal poured into one thing, the speed she didn't have. For half a heartbeat the gap closed. The fact Brightspear had built his whole fight on, that he was simply faster always, a law of nature, quietly stopped being true mid-swing. He committed to a window that wasn't there anymore. You could watch the exact moment the arithmetic broke behind his eyes. He was still winning the fight he'd planned. He just stopped being in that fight. What happened next took about a second and a half, and I've replayed it more times than I'll admit. Yuna didn't kill him. This was a trial, not the Riftlins, but she made the point with surgical contempt. She slipped the combination he'd already committed to, stepped inside his reach where all that speed was useless, and laid the flat of her blade against his throat hard enough to fold him to his knees. Then she held it there. 1 second. 2. Long enough for the entire arena to understand that she had chosen not to finish it, which is a far worse humiliation than losing. Losing is bad luck. Being spared is a verdict. Brightspear knelt in the silence with his bright name and his real rank and his comfortable arithmetic, all of it suddenly worth exactly nothing. And the crowd that had made the satisfied sound a minute earlier made no sound at all. That is my favorite sound in the world, a room full of people recalculating at once. An upset in a trial like this isn't a result, it's a rumor with legs. By the time Yuna walked off the sand, it had already started moving up the tiers, into the boxes, mouth to ear. The jinx put down a House Min Grandmaster prodigy, and the leech was standing right there when it happened. The houses didn't applaud. Houses don't applaud, they assess. I watched a dozen faces in a dozen boxes do the quiet arithmetic of the genuinely powerful, not is she good, but what is she worth, and to whom, and what does it cost to find out? And up in the gold, Cao Rui finally looked at me, just for a moment. The bored dismissal was gone, replaced by something smaller and far more useful to me: irritation. The flicker of a man who'd filed a result, watched reality refuse to match the file, and disliked being wrong almost as much as he'd have disliked losing. I gave him a polite little nod. Keep underestimating us, Rui. It's the most generous thing you'll ever do for me. Let me do the books because the books are the best part. Going in, that bout cost me a month's saved tribute, the whole reserve, spent in one precise burst. Amateur accounting says I'm broke now. Real accounting knows better. Beating a grandmaster didn't just win a bracket slot. It forced Yuna's own growth up a step, the way fighting above your weight always does, and every scrap of that new growth pays out to me. So the ledger that read empty an hour ago was already filling back in, faster than before, because a stronger Yuna earns more tribute per swing than a weaker one ever could. That's the entire engine, the thing none of them up here would believe even if I drew them a diagram. I don't spend tribute and lose it. I spend it to make the thing that generates it bigger. Today's haul: one humiliated grandmaster prodigy, one arena full of recalculating nobles, and a partner measurably stronger than she was at breakfast. We walked in broke. We walked out compounding. Best money I never had. The patron was waiting when we came off the floor, and she was pleased, which I trusted about as far as I could throw her house. You spent your entire reserve on a first-round bout, she observed. Reckless, or a statement. With you, I suspect it's always both. She'd clocked it, not the tribute, she couldn't see that, but the shape of the gamble, the all-in on day one. That alone told me she understood me better than anyone who'd ever called me Leech. Then she did the thing she does, the velvet turn of the screw. I'm glad I chose well, she said, chose, as though the win were a return on her investment, as though Yuna's blade and my year of scheming were line items in her ledger now. She wasn't congratulating me. She was reminding me whose name the victory accrued to. I thanked her for her faith and quietly added it to my own books, a debt I'd never agreed to, compounding in a currency I couldn't yet pay. The leash hadn't tightened. It had only reminded me it was there. Meanwhile, several tiers down, the Zhao family was having a worse evening than Brightspear. I didn't see it, but I didn't need to. Mei Lin's web carries bad news uphill faster than good. The patriarch had been told the leech, and the jinx hadn't crawled off to die quietly as instructed. They'd climbed into the one arena his house couldn't walk into and start breaking things, because the upper houses guard their trials the way dragons guard the boring parts of the horde. He couldn't reach us. So he did what cornered money always does: reach for someone who could. A quiet sum changed hands. Somewhere in the bracket, among the entrants, the officials, the hangers-on, the Zhao family now owned a knife it hadn't owned that morning. A face we wouldn't recognize, carrying instructions that had nothing to do with winning trials. I didn't know who yet. I just knew the arithmetic had shifted. We'd climbed out of their reach. They'd simply bought a longer arm. That's the trouble with making yourself worth killing. People start budgeting for it. There was one more set of eyes on us that evening, and these I noticed because they weren't doing what eyes up here do. Across the concourse, the leashed girl from House Cao, collar, handler, the whole sad inventory, was watching Yuna. Not pricing her the way the nobles did. Watching her the way you watch something you've stopped letting yourself want. When Yuna had knelt that grandmaster, the girl's handler had scoffed. The girl had gone very still. And now she watched me hand Yuna a water skin and say something that made the fearsome jinx roll her eyes, and I saw the thought cross her face, the one I recognize because I traffic in it. The dangerous little idea that things could be arranged differently, that a person might be a partner instead of a possession. I didn't approach her. You don't grab the undervalued asset on day one. You let it notice on its own that you saw it. So I met her eyes for a second, long enough to say I know what they're paying you, and it isn't enough, and then looked away, and let the thought do its slow work. Mei Lin found me before I'd even sat down, already wearing the smile she wears when a situation has become monetizable. "Do you have any idea," she said, "what your little stunt did to your market value?" Up here, apparently, an unknown leech with a giant-killing partner is a rumor everyone suddenly wants the inside of, and the only person selling that inside was Mei Lin, who'd spent the last hour, by her own cheerful account, answering questions I didn't have to answer, for prices I very much enjoyed. 3 minor houses had already inquired about Yuna. 2 officials wanted to know who I really was. And 1 anonymous party had paid an indecent sum simply to confirm we were as broke as we looked, which told me someone was measuring us for a coffin, and told Mei Lin only that desperation remained her finest export. She'd spun gossip about us into a tidy map of who was circling us. "Network is power," she said, handing me the list, "and you, darling, are finally generating some traffic." I didn't argue. She just charged our enemies to draw me their own positions. Bao, meanwhile, was bored, which is the most dangerous thing Bao can be. A man built like a collapsed building does not enjoy standing decoratively behind me while other people fight. "These trials," he rumbled, eyeing the brackets, "have a money side. Side bets, exhibition bouts, pits but with better lighting." He wasn't wrong, and worse, he knew I knew it. The upper tier ran a whole shadow economy beneath the noble pageantry, undercard fights where the real gambling happened, the kind of thing the houses pretended not to see and bet on heavily. Bao wanted in. I wanted the purse. So we struck the deal we always strike. He gets to hit people, I get a cut and a second income that doesn't live or die by the trials, and everyone agrees it was his idea. I seeded him into the undercard for the coming days, my undefeated Ironhide, criminally underpriced by people who'd never watched him work. It is nice, occasionally, to bet on a sure thing. Keeps the books from getting lonely. Tan waited until the others had scattered before saying the thing he'd been chewing on, because Tan never spends a warning in public when he can corner you with it in private. "That bout today," he said, not looking up from the reagents he was grinding. "You emptied the well." I told him it was already refilling, faster than before. "I know," he said. "That's what worries me." He set down the pestle and gave me the flat look of a man who'd watched a lot of clever people optimize themselves into a grave. "Every rung you climb, the opponents cost more to beat, more tribute per fight, not less. And the higher she goes, the bigger the gaps you'll be papering over with it. One day you'll spend everything you have on the most important fight there is, and it still won't be enough. And you'll be standing there with an empty ledger and a bad habit for solving that." He went back to grinding. "I'm not saying don't climb. I'm saying know what's at the top of the curve before you're standing on it." I filed it under later, which, in my experience, is exactly where the dangerous numbers like to hide. We didn't get to enjoy the win past morning. Cao Rui saw to that. He didn't come himself. Men like him deliver their own messages about as often as they fight their own fights. But the challenge arrived with his crest on it, formal and public and impossible to refuse without looking like exactly the coward they'd branded Yuna for 2 years. A sanctioned bout. Yuna against a House Cao entrant of his choosing, 3 days out, on the main sand where everyone could watch. On the surface, a courtesy of the trials, one talent testing another. Underneath, it was Cao Rui doing the only thing his pride would permit after being made to feel wrong, arranging to be proven right loudly by someone he'd bought specifically to do it. He'd picked the ground, the timing, and the opponent. He'd left us nothing to choose but yes, which, I'll admit, is decent scheming for an amateur. The trouble with forcing your enemy's hand is that you also tell him precisely when and where you intend to hurt him. And I do my best work with a deadline and a target. 3 days to prepare for a fight Cao Rui had rigged, against an opponent he hadn't named, in front of a house that wanted us erased. Most men would have spent those days training. I spent the first hour doing what I actually do, refusing to fight the fight my enemy designed. Cao Rui's whole world is muscle you can buy. Talent acquired, polished, pointed. Try to outmuscle a great house and I lose because that's arithmetic, and I'm not sentimental about arithmetic, but muscle has a blind spot. A house that owns its power assumes everyone keeps theirs the same way. It cannot conceive of an enemy who grows by addition instead of purchase. So I didn't plan to survive Cao Rui's bout. I planned to use it as cover, as theater, the loud distraction under which I do the quiet thing I'm good at. While he sharpened a blade to point at us, I went looking for the next person this world had thrown away. You don't beat a collector by collecting harder. You bait him by being the one thing he refuses to see coming. It took Mei Lin half a day to learn who Cao Rui meant to field against Yuna, and the answer made me put down my tea. The caged girl. The one with the collar I'd clocked on the first day. Her name was Su Yin, and her file read like a crime. Awakened young and high, higher than half the prodigies Cao paraded, and then, somewhere along the way, inconvenient. Too proud, the notes implied. Too unwilling to lose on command. So House Cao had done what houses do with talent they can't fully break. Not sold her, not freed her. Shelved her. Trotted her out when they needed a weapon. Collared the rest of the time, her wins credited to the house and her name kept deliberately small. It was Yuna's story with the serial numbers filed off. A dangerous woman the powerful had decided was safer broken than free. Cao Rui meant to make her fight us. Certain she'd obey, certain she'd win, certain it would humiliate me. He'd handed me, gift-wrapped, the exact kind of person my whole life is built to recruit. Getting 5 minutes alone with a collared asset of House Cao takes either an army or Mei Lin. Thankfully, I had the cheaper one. I found Su Yin in a training annex, working a form with a precision no one was watching but me. She knew me before I spoke, the leech with the giant killer. "You're here to rattle me before the bout," she said, not turning. "It won't work, and it's beneath even you." I told her I wasn't there to rattle her. I was there to make an offer, and the offer was rude, so I'd keep it short. Her house had decided what she was worth, and they'd decided wrong, and I was the only person in this building who'd noticed. She turned then, cold, sharp, measuring me for the lie she assumed was coming. And what would a man with no power and no money do with someone like me? Fair question. The same thing I did with her, I said. Value you correctly. It's astonishing how rare that is, and astonishing what people will do for the one person who manages it. Yuna took the news that she'd be fighting my newest recruitment target with the equanimity I've come to treasure. "Let me understand," she said, sharpening a blade with slightly more force than the blade required. "Cao Rui wants me to publicly beat a woman. You want me to beat her well enough that she likes us afterward and badly enough that some contract clause triggers, and you've already gone and talked to her. Alone. At night." It was the only time she was free, I said, which was true and which I regretted instantly. Yuna pointed the sword at me, not unkindly. "I am not jealous," she announced, in the tone of a woman entering a fact into the record. "I survived 2 years of this city wanting me dead. I can survive you collecting strays." Then, quieter, the part that mattered. "But you don't get to do to her what you do to everyone. See the angle and run the play. If she comes in, she comes in eyes open, or I stop it myself." Noted. It's the rule I'd never break anyway. The whole machine only works if they choose it. But it was good to hear her be the one guarding the door. The trouble with recruiting Su Yin was the trouble with stealing anything bolted down. The bolt. She wasn't an employee Cao could lose. She was property, indentured under a contract her family had signed away when she was young enough not to get a vote. Walking her out the front door wouldn't be recruitment, it would be theft, and theft from a great house doesn't end in a stern letter. It ends with the kind of correction the Zhao patriarch had only fantasized about, except Cao had the reach to actually deliver it. If I simply took her, I wouldn't be saving her. I'd be handing my whole network a death sentence with her name at the top. So the bond couldn't be offered. It had to be won loose, legally, publicly, in a way even House Cao would have to swallow without starting a war. Which meant I needed the one thing sharper than any sword in this city and more expensive than all of them. I needed a loophole, and I knew exactly which overpriced auburn-haired broker kept a drawer full of them. Mei Lin read the contract twice, then smiled the smile that costs me money. "It's airtight," she said happily. Which is the tell. Nobody writes airtight unless they're afraid of one specific leak. She found it on the third pass, An old indenture clause, the kind great houses keep to reclaim talents who flee a forfeiture rule. Enter an indentured fighter in a sanctioned bout under a formal wager of contract, and if they lose, their papers transfer to the winner's sponsor. It was written so houses could poach each other's runaways without bloodshed. Nobody had imagined it pointed the other way. Cao Rui had entered Su Yin in a sanctioned bout himself, to humiliate me. All I had to do was get a formal contract wager attached before the gong, quietly, under the patron standing, so it read as routine, and the bout he designed to break me became the legal instrument that pried his asset loose. Of course, Mei Lin added, sliding the clause across the table, this assumes Yuna wins and that Cao Rui doesn't spot the trap until it's sprung and that you can afford me. 3 assumptions. I've built dynasties on worse. The main sand 3 days on, a full house, the gong about to sound, and a small formal wager of contract filed an hour earlier under the patron's seal, routine enough that no Cao clerk blinked. Cao Rui sat in his gold box expecting a coronation. Across the sand Su Yin took her mark, collar off for the bout, and for the first time I saw her fight free of it. The house had been right to be afraid. She was brilliant, faster than Yuna, more polished, 2 years of bottled fury behind every cut. For a while it was genuinely even, 2 caged women hitting each other like it was the only honest conversation either had been allowed in years. I spent tribute carefully, not to crush Su Yin but to keep Yuna in it because the win had to be real. A gift win triggers nothing. And slowly Yuna did the thing Su Yin had forgotten was possible. She fought like someone with a reason. Su Yin fought like someone with a leash, even with it off. That was the difference. It's always the difference. Cao Rui worked out the trap at the worst moment for him and the most satisfying for me. Mid-bout, when Yuna started winning and a clerk leaned up to murmur in his ear about a contract wager filed under the patron's seal, I watched it land. The board certainty curdled, cracked, then went somewhere uglier. A lesser heir would have raged. Cao Rui did the colder thing and reached for his money, the only language his family ever taught him to speak. Officials were quietly summoned. A protest was lodged. Suddenly there were irregularities in the filing, a clerk who needed to verify, a process that could be slowed just long enough to void the wager if it never cleared. He couldn't stop Yuna winning anymore, but he could try to make the winning not count, buy the gap between the gong and the paperwork, and erase Su Yin's freedom in the seam. He'd stopped trying to beat me. Now he just wanted to deny me. That's what spite looks like when it has a great house's checkbook. The price of taking Su Yin had just gone up. It always does, right at the end. Yuna won. Cleanly, undeniably, the flat of her blade at Su Yin's throat for the 2nd time that month, except this time the woman kneeling wasn't an enemy, and both of them seemed to know it. Cao Rui's stalling nearly worked. The clerk hovered. The wager hung unverified in the seam he'd bought. So I did the one thing he hadn't budgeted for. Before the bout, I'd had Mei Lin leak the wager's existence to 3 rival houses that would adore watching Cao publicly welch on a sanctioned contract. With all those eyes on him, voiding it would cost Cao Rui more face than honoring it. He chose his pride. The papers cleared. And Su Yin, unleashed, unsold, hers for the first time in her life, looked at the collar an official was unlocking from her throat, then at me. You planned all of this, she said. Most of it, I admitted. And if I'd lost, then I'd have planned something else. She almost smiled. Then she did the thing that can't be schemed, the thing that has to be chosen. She stepped to our side of the sand. And somewhere only I can see, a second quiet stream of tribute opened and the whole machine grew. Here's what nobody warns the great houses about the network model. It compounds. With Su Yin bonded, I had 2 streams of tribute instead of 1, and not 2 small ones because she'd arrived already strong, a high-awakened talent who'd spent years with the brakes on. The brakes came off. The days that followed were the best kind of boring, the kind where the plan simply works. Yuna tore up her side of the bracket. Su Yin, fighting for herself for the first time, tore up hers. Tan, flush at last with a real budget from Bao's undercard purses, started cooking reagents that turned a day's training into 3. And every win, every drop of growth from 2 fighters instead of 1, paid back to me, which I spent making them sharper, which made them win more, which paid back more. Up and up, a staircase I was building under my own feet as I climbed it. That month's scoreboard read like a fever dream: 2 giant killers, a war chest, an alchemist with toys, and a leech getting quietly, dangerously rich on other people's potential. For a few days I let myself enjoy it, which is usually the cue for the universe to send a bill. The day Su Yin broke through, I finally understood what House Cao had actually wasted. Yuna's growth I'd watched build brick by patient brick over a starved month, earned, slow, hard one. Su Yin's was different. Hers wasn't a climb, it was a dam giving way. Years of a real prodigy's talent, pressed flat under a collar and a leash and a house that wanted her useful but never free, all of it let go at once, the moment she finally had fuel, freedom, and a reason that belonged to her. I felt it through the bond before I saw it. Tribute didn't trickle, it roared, more from one breakthrough than Yuna paid me in a good week. Across the training annex, Su Yin came out of her forms gasping, staring at her own hands wreathed in a power she'd spent years being ordered to keep small, and stepped, clean and undeniable, across the threshold into Grandmaster. Not the doorstep, across it. She looked at me like she was bracing to be told to shrink again. I just nodded. "Bigger," I said. "Always bigger." She laughed once, like something unlocking. House Cao had owned a Grandmaster and used her as a leash ornament. I'd freed one in a month, and she was only getting started. The Patron summoned me alone, which she'd never done, and that was the first warning. The room was all glass and altitude, the city laid out below like a deed she happened to hold. She didn't mention the trials. She poured 2 glasses of something that cost more than Tan's entire lab and watched me with an interest that had changed flavor. "You're growing faster than I expected," she said. 2 bonds now. You'll want more." Not a question, and not quite approval, a buyer inspecting a yield. Then she said the thing that put a cold finger on my spine. "When I found you, little host, I thought I'd found a survivor, a clever weed that refused to be pulled. I'm beginning to think I found something more useful. Tell me," and she leaned in, "how strong do you imagine you could become if someone with real resources decided to feed you?" I gave her a careful nothing of an answer, but I heard the shape under the question. She didn't want to protect a host. She wanted to grow one. And nobody grows a thing they don't intend, eventually, to harvest. The 2 of them circled each other for about a week, which is roughly how long it takes 2 people who have each been the most dangerous woman in every room to decide whether to be allies or a problem. I stayed out of it. Some things you can't optimize, you can only let happen. The thaw came over a shared grievance, as thaws do. A sponsor's aide made the mistake of sneering at the jinx and the cast-off, within earshot of both. By the time they'd finished with him, verbally, Yuna's specialty, and with one quiet promise of violence, Su Yin's, they were nearly smiling. "He fights with words," Su Yin observed. "I noticed," said Yuna. "It's why I keep him." She nodded at me. And there it was, said plainly to the newcomer, the thing I never have to explain twice to the people who stay. I don't command them, don't own them, don't fight their fights. I'm the armory. They're the blades, and they know exactly whose hands they're in, their own. Su Yin studied me a long moment, recalibrating something. "He really doesn't pretend to be the hero," she said. "No," Yuna agreed. "It's unspeakably restful." Losing Su Yin in public, to a leech, in front of 3 rival houses, did something to House Cao that beating their entrance never had. A defeat they can absorb. Defeats are weather. But I hadn't just beaten them, I'd taken from them, walked off with a piece of their property in front of everyone, and made them sign the receipt. That isn't a loss. That's a precedent. And great houses understand in their marrow that a precedent left standing is an invitation to every other gutter nobody in the city. So Cao Rui went to his father. I heard about it the way I hear about everything, through Mei Lin's web. The heir who dismissed me as a clerical error had stood in front of the Cao patriarch and asked for a hunting license. He got it. Whatever budget, whatever reach, whatever quiet ugliness the house could bring to bear, Cao Rui now had the authority to spend it making me an example. I'd wanted them to stop underestimating me. I should be more careful what I optimize for. I got exactly what I asked, and it came with teeth. A great house with a grudge doesn't come at you with one big blow. That would be sporting, and sporting is for people who might lose. Cao Rui came at us with 1,000 small ones. Overnight, the bracket developed a sense of humor. Yuna and Su Yin kept drawing the hardest possible matchups, back-to-back, no rest, while Cao's own entrance got feather-bedded paths to the upper rounds. Tan's suppliers suddenly couldn't fill our reagent orders, not refused, just delayed indefinitely, apologetically, by men who developed a nervous habit of glancing over their shoulders. Invitations dried up. Friendly officials went formal. The lodging raised our rate for reassessed risk. None of it was illegal. All of it was Cao. It was a campaign run by a man who'd finally grasped that he couldn't beat my fighters in the ring, so he'd beat my operation outside it, bleed us slow, raise our costs, exhaust our people, and let the math finish what his entrance couldn't. And the worst part, the part I had to respect, it was working. Pressure flushes things out, and Cao's flushed out the knife the Zhao family had bought weeks ago. Mei Lin found the connection, a mid-level trials official, the kind nobody watches, who'd taken Zhao money to make problems for us and had lately started taking Cao money for the same thing. Two enemies who'd never met, paying the same man, pointed at the same target. He was the one losing our filings and misremembering our match times. Petty, until you see what it meant. The Zhao family's grudge from the gutter and Cao's grudge from the gold had quietly found each other and pooled their budgets. The man who framed Yuna once taught me this. A scapegoat is just a target two powers have agreed to share. We'd become exactly that, on a bigger stage to bigger people. I didn't move on the official, not yet. A knife you've spotted is worth more left in place, pointed where you can see it than pulled where they'll only buy another. But I added the lesson to the ledger. My enemies were no longer a list. They were starting to become an alliance. Mei Lin charged me double for the next piece, which is how I knew it mattered. She'd been quietly pulling threads on our gracious benefactor, because a leash you can't see the end of is just a noose with better manners. What she found wasn't an answer. It was the shape of one. The patron's house had a pattern. Over the years she'd discovered a handful of impossible talents, outcasts, anomalies, people who shouldn't have been able to do what they did, sponsored them, raised them high. And then one by one those talents had simply stopped. Not died, not publicly. Vanished from the rolls at the height of their rise, the way a number vanishes when someone finally collects a debt. I can't tell you what she does with them, Mei Lin admitted, for once not enjoying herself. Only that she's done it before and you fit the profile she shops for. It wasn't proof. It was worse than proof, it was a precedent, and I just learned, expensively, what great houses do with those. The patron wasn't raising me. She was acquiring me. And the harvest she'd hinted at had a track record. We kept winning because that's the trap of momentum. It looks like safety right up until the bill comes due. The bill came due on a Tuesday. Bao, overconfident and undersupplied after Cao choked our reagents, took an undercard bout we needed the purse from, against a fighter who turned out to be one of Cao's quiet hires. He lost. Not theatrically, brutally. A leg broken in 3 places, our reliable income and our biggest body laid up for weeks in a single afternoon. And it was arranged. Mei Lin confirmed the matchmaker had been paid to feed Bao a wolf dressed as a paycheck. Tan set the leg grim and out of the good reagents Cao had cut off, which meant it would heal slow and may be wrong. Yuna and Su Yin won their own bouts that same day, real wins. The scoreboard still climbed. But I stood in our cramped lodging that night looking at Bao laid out and Tan's dwindling shelves and understood the new shape of things. Up here you could win every fight that mattered and still be losing. The house had more ways to hurt me than I had fighters to absorb. That night I did the books the way you probe a sore tooth, already knowing. For weeks the engine had compounded, tribute arriving faster than I spent it. Cao's campaign had quietly reversed it. Harder matchups meant I had to spend more tribute per bout just to keep Yuna and Su Yin safe, not winning safe. The choked supplies slowed their growth, which meant less tribute coming in. Bao's purse gone. More spent, less earned. I watched the most reliable number in my life cross from black into red and keep going. The whole premise of me, the thing that makes a powerless man dangerous, is that I always have a reserve, a saved edge, a withdrawal ready for the moment that matters. I was burning the reserve to survive ordinary Tuesdays. And Tan's warning came back word for word. One day you'll spend everything you have on the most important fight there is, and it still won't be enough. He'd said it like a far-off curve. It wasn't far off now. I could see the bottom of the well, and Cao was working very hard to make sure I reached it right before the fight he most wanted me to lose. Cao Rui finally came to see me in person, which told me he thought he'd already won. He found me alone, he'd have arranged that too, and for a moment just looked at me the way you look at a problem nearly solved. I don't understand you, he admitted, and it visibly cost his pride. No awakening, no house, no fortune, no name. By every measure that exists, you are nothing. And yet here you are, costing me sleep. I told him that was the difference between us if he wanted it. He'd been handed everything and never once had to learn what it was worth. I'd been handed nothing and learned the price of every single thing I'd ever touched. You inherited a house, I said. I'm building one out of the people you threw away. You should ask yourself why they keep choosing me over you, a man with nothing to offer but the truth about what they're worth. His jaw tightened. He'd come to gloat, and for one bad second I'd made him feel poor. Enjoy your little family, he said, rising. I'm going to take them apart one at a time, make you watch, and you won't be able to buy your way out because you have nothing left to spend. He wasn't entirely wrong about the last part, but he just handed me his whole plan in order to feel powerful saying it. Entitled men always do. Cao's cleverest move wasn't aimed at me at all. It was aimed at Su Yin, and it was generous, which is how I knew it was a blade. An emissary reached her quietly, not Cao Rui. He doesn't do his own seductions either, with an offer almost too good to be a trap. Come home. Full reinstatement, her name restored to the rolls, the collar gone for good, a real seat in a real house. Everything she'd been bred to want and denied. All she had to do was hand them me, a throne bout at the right moment, a whisper about how the leech's power actually works, a door left open. Mei Lin caught wind of it and brought it to me grim, expecting orders. I didn't give any. You can't outbid a great house for someone's loyalty. Try, and you're just the higher offer, and offers can always be beaten. So I did the only thing that works. I told Su Yin I knew about the offer, that it was a good one, and that the door was hers to walk through any time, no debt, no grudge, and then I left it entirely to her. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who's only ever been owned is hand them a real choice and mean it. While I was busy not controlling Su Yin, the past came for Yuna the way it always does, sideways when she's looking at something else. A guest had arrived at the trials, a decorated hunter-commander touring the upper houses, the sort who collects sponsorships and tells war stories. And he knew her, not as the jinx of the lower district, as Yuna from before, from the expedition. I watched him spot her across a reception and go pale, then deliberately, performatively warm, the way a guilty man performs ease. Mei Lin pulled the thread fast. He'd served under Commander Wei, the man who buried Yuna's squad and then buried her with the blame. This one had signed the report, and now here he was, prosperous and promoted, watching the woman he'd helped destroy claw her way toward rooms he thought he'd locked her out of forever. He didn't approach. He did something worse, left early in a hurry, which told me he was going to go report that the jinx was rising. Yuna watched him flee and said nothing for a long while. They're going to know I'm not dead, she said finally. Good, I told her. Let them. The whole point of climbing is becoming too high to bury. But I added a new name to the ledger, in the column I least like, the one labeled people who need us gone for what we know, not what we've done. Su Yin gave Cao her answer 3 days later, and she gave it her way. The emissary came for the decision. She handed back the reinstatement contract unsigned, folded once, with a single word written across the seal that I won't repeat but that Mei Lin described as anatomically ambitious. She'd chosen us. Not because I'd bought her, because, for the first time, refusing was a thing she was allowed to do. I won't pretend the strategist in me didn't tally it as a win. But the rest of me, the part that remembers being a zero in a line waiting to be fed to monsters, felt something quiet and unfamiliar. I think might have been pride. The trouble is that a great house experiences a refusal the way it experiences a theft, as a thing that cannot be permitted to stand. Cao Rui had offered Su Yin a golden door, and she'd spat on it in front of his emissary. Whatever he'd been planning for us now had her name at the top of the list, underlined, with a deadline attached. You don't humiliate a man like that twice and get a third morning to enjoy it. The retaliation arrived dressed, as Cao's cruelties always are in the language of the rules. A formal high-stakes challenge, sanctioned and inescapable. Su Yin against a House Cao fighter named Vol. I knew the name, everyone did. Vol wasn't a prodigy or a showcase, he was an enforcer, a brutal high star the house kept for exactly this, a man whose record read less like a list of wins than a list of careers he'd ended. The stated stakes were Su Yin standing in the trials. The real stakes, the ones Cao Rui didn't have to write down because everyone understood them, were her body. This wasn't about he expected her to lose. It was about he expected her not to walk away from a public, legal, deniable maiming, the down payment on his promise to take my family apart one at a time and make me watch. And it was scheduled for 2 days out, which was Cao's final elegant little cut. 2 days wasn't nearly enough time to ready Su Yin for a man like Vol. But it was exactly enough time to make me watch, the clock run down on a ledger that had nothing left in it. I went to the patron because when you're out of moves you go to the player with the most of them, even knowing the price. I laid it out plainly. Cao means to cripple Su Yin in a sanctioned bout. It's a proxy to get at me, and one word from a house like hers could quietly make the matchup disappear. She listened, swirling her impossible drink, and when I finished she smiled the smile I'd come to dread, the one that means she's about to teach me something. No, she said, just that first to let it land. Then you misunderstand what I am to you, little host. I'm not a shield. A shield protects things regardless of their worth. I am an investor, and an investor does not spend to protect an asset from a test. She watches the test very closely to learn what the asset is actually worth. She set the glass down. Cao has cornered you with no resources and no reserve. I find I am extremely curious what you'll do, so show me. And there it was, the leash pulled all the way taut at last. She wasn't refusing to help me. She was refusing on purpose, because my desperation was the experiment, and she'd been waiting for it. So I did what I do. I sat down with 2 days and counted everything twice, looking for the move. There's always a move. That's the one article of faith a man like me is allowed. I counted the tribute, a trickle, no reserve, not after weeks of Cao bleeding us, nowhere near enough to lift Su Yin to Vol's level, not even close. I counted the angles, bribed the matchmaker, Cao owned him. Forfeit. Forfeiting a sanctioned challenge meant forfeiting her standing and her freedom both, straight back into a collar. Run. You don't outrun a great house, you just die tired. Another loophole. Mei Lin looked for 2 days and came back hollow-eyed and empty. Cao had written this one airtight because this time he'd learned. Every door I'd ever used was nailed shut, and behind the only one left stood the thing I'd sworn never to touch, the option Tan had warned me about, the one I'd filed under later and prayed later would never come. For the first time since this began, I sat in the dark with the books open and found no honest move on the page. Only the dishonest one, the one with my own name on the bill. Yuna found me in the dark, of course. She always knows. She didn't ask what I'd decided. She could read it on me, the particular stillness of a man who's found the answer and hates it. She sat down across from me the way she had that first night up here, and for a while we didn't speak, which between us is still the realest conversation we have. When they branded me, she said finally, I used to lie awake doing the math on it. How many years I'd lost. What I'd be worth now if Wei hadn't, she stopped. I'd run the numbers until I hated myself. You do that too, I've watched you. The numbers are just how I keep the fear in a drawer, I told her. I know, she said. That's why I'm telling you to close the drawer tonight, she leaned in. Whatever you're about to do, you've already decided it, so stop pricing it. Some things you don't get to put on the ledger, Jin. Some things you just pay. It was, I think, the most anyone had ever seen me. I'd spent my whole life being the one who sees. I had never once budgeted for what it costs to be seen back. The morning of the bout came the way the worst mornings do, ordinary, Indifferent, the sun not caring at all. The main sand again. A full house again because Cao had made sure the whole trials would watch. Spectacle is half the cruelty. Su Yin stood at her mark, collarless and calm in a way that frightened me more than fear would have, a woman who decided that being free for a few weeks was worth whatever this cost. Across from her, Vol rolled his shoulders and looked bored, a butcher waiting for the meat. Up in the gold, Cao Rui watched me, not the ring, because the ring was never the point. The point was my face, and what it would do when I had nothing left to spend and watched it happen anyway. I stood at the rail with an empty ledger and a decision I'd made in the dark, and I understood that the man up in the gold had finally engineered the one thing I'd spent my whole life avoiding. He'd built a moment where being the armory wasn't enough, where the only weapon left on the field was me. The bell rang and it went exactly as Cao had paid for it to go. Vol didn't fight Su Yin so much as begin dismantling her methodically, the way you take apart a thing you've been told to break rather than beat. She was good gods, she was good, everything the house had wasted, but good has a ceiling, and Vol lived a full tier above it. I reached for the ledger the way I've reached 100 times, the reflex of my whole life. Find the turn, spend the reserve, tilt the half-second. And there was nothing there, a trickle, dust. I tried to spend it anyway, poured every scrap I had into Su Yin's speed and watched it do almost nothing, a candle against a landslide. She took a hit that folded her, took another that put her down, and I stood at the rail doing the one thing I have never in my entire life known how to do. Nothing. The engine that makes a powerless man dangerous had finally, at the worst possible second, simply run out. This was the part Tan warned me about. He'd been right, I just hadn't believed him in time. There is a line in the parasite system I've known about since the beginning and never once crossed. The system feeds on the growth of the people bonded to me, and I spend it to make them stronger. That's the whole machine, clean and one-directional. But there's a second valve, a darker one that I found early and shut fast. I can spend tribute on myself. Pour it inward instead of outward, force a borrowed sliver of power into a body born with exactly none. I never have, for two reasons. The first is that it's grotesquely inefficient. A zero's body isn't built to hold power, so most of it just burns off as pain, a fortune spent to light a single match. The second reason is the one that actually stopped me. I've always known, the way you know a cliff edge in the dark, that once I become the weapon even once, I lose the ability to pretend I'm only the armory. And down in the ring Su Yin was not getting up, and Vol was raising his arm for the blow that ends things, and the empty ledger had exactly enough dust left in it for one match. One. They knew before I moved. That's the thing about people who have watched you long enough. Tan caught my arm. Yuna stepped into my path, both reading the decision on my face faster than I could make it. Don't, Tan said, and the old alchemist who measures every word spent 3 at once. You put power in that body. It doesn't make you a fighter, it makes you a wound that hasn't happened yet. I've seen Unawakened try. There isn't enough left of them to bury. Yuna's hand was flat against my chest, hard. She's strong, she said, meaning Su Yin, meaning she'll survive a loss, meaning don't you dare. You spend yourself for this, there's no refilling it. You don't grow it back, Jin. Whatever you burn is gone, off your own life forever. And they were right, both of them, completely right. I'd done the math a dozen times in 2 days and it said exactly what their faces did, a terrible idea that costs more than it can ever return. But math assumes you're trying to come out ahead. I wasn't anymore. I looked past Yuna's hand to the ring, where Vol's arm was coming down, and made the first genuinely irrational decision of my life. I spent it inward. I won't pretend I can describe what that's like, because the language for it doesn't exist in a body that's never held power. Imagine pouring molten metal through a vessel made of paper and calling it a drink. The dust in the ledger, the last scrap of everyone's growth, went into me, and for one single second a zero stopped being a zero. It wasn't strength, not really. It was just enough to clear the rail before I decided to, enough to cross the sand faster than a man my size has any right to, enough to get my own body into the space between Su Yin and the blow already falling. I did not beat Vol. Let me be precise about that because it matters. I did not win a fight. I am not a fighter and I never will be. I just spent a piece of my own life to be in one place at one time that I could not otherwise have reached. The smallest possible miracle. And it was, without question, the worst thing I have ever felt. Vol's blow caught me instead of her, and the borrowed second ran out at exactly the wrong moment. The kind of joke the universe tells when it isn't in the mood to be funny. The power that had let me cross the sand evaporated the instant before impact, so what took the hit was just me. A zero, a paper vessel, with none of the strength left that had got me there. I don't remember the landing. I remember the after on my back in the sand, every nerve I owned screaming about the fortune I just burned, tasting copper, watching the high ceiling of the arena swim. Tan would tell me later, grimly, what the lease had cost, that I'd spent something I'd never get back, shaved a piece off myself in a currency that doesn't refill. But lying there, the thing that frightened me most wasn't the pain or the price. It was a small, awful flicker underneath it. Because for 1 second out there I hadn't been the man behind the fighters. I'd been the one in the ring. And some buried, starving part of me, the part that's been a zero its whole life, sneered at, stepped over, had liked it. That's the cost nobody warns you about. Not what it does to your body, what it offers your worst self. Here is what the arena saw. A zero, a registered unawakened, a leech with no awakening to his name, crossed 20 feet of sand faster than a trained hunter and channeled power he is biologically incapable of possessing. They didn't see a clever sponsor anymore. They saw the impossible in broad daylight with 1,000 witnesses. The bout dissolved into chaos, officials swarming, Vol backing off confused, the crowd roaring a question nobody had an answer to. Su Yin was safe. Cao's neat little murder had detonated in his hands, because you cannot quietly cripple a girl while the whole arena is screaming about the man who shouldn't exist. So in the narrowest sense I'd won. She lived, the trap broke, but I'd paid for it with the one thing I'd guarded above my own life, my secret. Every theory about what I am had just been thrown into the open air for the powerful to fight over. And up in the gold, while every other face in that arena was confused or afraid, exactly one was neither. The patron leaned forward, very still, wearing the expression of a woman who's just watched an experiment return precisely the result she refused to shield me away from. She wasn't shocked. She was delighted. I'd just shown her in public the exact thing she'd been hunting. They carried me out of that arena, which is its own special humiliation for a man who prides himself on walking. The network gathered in our cramped lodging that night around the wreck of me, the way they'd once gathered around a wobbly table to decide to climb, except nobody was talking about climbing now. Tan worked over me in grim silence, his hands telling me what his mouth wouldn't, that some of this wasn't going to fully heal, that I'd be paying installments on that 1 second for a long time. Bao still laid up himself, just stared at the ceiling and said, "Stupid," with enormous affection. Mei Lin, who monetizes everything, didn't take out her tablet once. And Su Yin sat by me and wouldn't meet my eyes, because the newest member of the family had just watched the man who promised to value her correctly spend a piece of his own life to keep a promise she hadn't known was that literal. We'd won. Su Yin was alive and free. But it didn't feel like the wins used to, the clean ones with the numbers going up. It felt like exactly what it was, a victory I'd had to bleed for, in a currency I can't earn back. The patron came to see me the next day, and she did not bring a physician. She brought interest. She sat at my bedside like a collector visiting a piece that had finally appreciated and didn't bother with the pretense of concern. We were past that, and she knew I knew it. "Do you understand what you did yesterday?" she asked. "I saved my friend," I told her. "You did something far rarer than that," she said softly. "You generated power, an unawakened, a zero-channeled force into the world. That isn't a cheat, little host. That isn't a clever trick with other people's strength. That is the thing," she let it hang. "There are men who have spent fortunes and lifetimes searching for what your broken little body did by accident in a fit of sentiment. I have been searching a long time myself. And there it was, the agenda surfacing at last, not the whole of it, but enough. She hadn't sponsored a survivor or even a host. She'd been hunting a specific impossibility for years, and she'd staged my desperation to see whether I was it. I was. The worst part was the gratitude on her face. I hadn't just failed to hide from her. I delivered myself, gift-wrapped, exactly on schedule. The women in my life took turns in their fashion, refusing to let me retreat into the ledger. Yin came first when she finally worked up the nerve to look at me. She didn't apologize. I'd have hated that. She just sat down and said, flatly, "No one has ever done that for me. I need you to understand that I know what it cost, that I will not forget it, and that if you ever do it again, I will break your other arm myself." Which from her was a vow. Then she did something better than thanks. She started training before dawn, harder than ever, because the fastest way to make sure I never had to bleed for her again was to become someone no one could corner. The bond between us thrummed with it, her growth pouring back to me, the system quietly mending what it could. Yuna came at night, as ever, and didn't say much at all. She just took the ledger out of my hands, closed it, and sat with me in the dark until the math stopped running. Some things you don't get to put on the books. She told me that. I was beginning, slowly and painfully, to believe her. When the worst of the pain ebbed and I could think in straight lines again, I did the only thing that's ever saved me, told myself the truth. The leash was not a weapon. It felt like one in the moment, felt like the answer, the secret last resort, the ace a man like me keeps up his sleeve. That feeling was the most dangerous thing about it. Because the math is merciless and I made myself read it. Every time I spend myself that way, I spend a piece I can't earn back, and a body like mine has very few pieces to give. Do it twice more and there might not be a third. So I made a rule there in the dark, the kind of rule I don't break. I will not win that way again, not at the climax Cao is surely already arranging, not ever if there's any other road. The leech doesn't survive by becoming the blade. He survives by being smarter about the blades he already has. Whatever comes next, I win it the way I've won everything that lasted, through them, with a plan, on a reserve I'm going to start rebuilding tonight. The drawer stays closed. I just have to make sure I never need it badly enough to open it again. Cao Rui, of course, drew exactly the wrong lesson from the arena, which is the reliable gift of men who have never lost anything. He'd watched me nearly die and seen not a warning but an opening. Word reached us within days through Mei Lin's web, and then, insultingly, through a formal proclamation. House Cao was sponsoring a grand exhibition at the trial's climax, a showcase bout for all the upper houses to attend, and they'd graciously extended an invitation we couldn't refuse without forfeiting everything we'd climbed for. Their champion, the one they'd kept off the sand this whole time, the blade whose rumor had been doing the cutting, against my best. Cao Rui wanted the biggest stage the city could offer, every house watching, the patron watching, so that when the Leech's little dynasty was finally broken, it would break in the most public and permanent way available. He thought I was weak now, bled dry, exposed, out of tricks. And the maddening thing, the thing I couldn't say to the worried faces around me, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. I was about to walk my people into a rigged fight against a clearly superior champion, on his stage, by his rules, with a reserve I'd barely begun to rebuild. The only thing I had that he didn't know about was that I'd already decided how it ends. So I did the thing I should have done weeks ago, before pride and momentum talked me into bleeding. I sat down and schemed it cold. No leasing. No last-second miracles off my own life. Just the work. I had Mei Lin price out everything she could learn about Cao's champion, because a fighter that good has habits, and habits are just a plan you've published in advance. I had supplies quietly restocked through 3 suppliers Cao didn't know Mei Lin owned. Build something specific for one fight rather than many. I put Yuna and Yin together, 2 blades who'd learned to trust each other, and trained them not as individuals but as a single argument with 2 edges. And every day, every bout, every scrap of growth I hoarded, not spending tribute now the reckless way I had all season, but saving it, rebuilding the one thing that wins fights like this. A reserve, a saved edge for the exact half-second it matters, spent on them, never again on me. Cao Rui thought he'd cornered a desperate man into a fight he couldn't win. He'd actually done something far more dangerous. He'd handed me a deadline, a target, and a stage. I don't win fights. I never have. I build the machine that wins them, and then I let it. The climb had one rung left, and I meant to spend it teaching a great house the difference between a man who buys power and a man who knows precisely what everything costs. There's a version of this story where the smart move is to walk away. I'll be honest that I considered it, pack the network up, take Su Yin and the win we already had, vanish down the tiers to be small and alive somewhere Cao couldn't be bothered to follow. I ran the numbers twice. They were good numbers. And then I threw them out because some math is just fear wearing a calculator. Walking away meant Cao Rui got to tell the story. And the story he'd tell was that the Leech ran, which meant every door we'd pried open slammed shut, the patron's protection evaporated, and the Zhao family's longer arm finally caught up to us in whatever gutter we crawled into. There was no version of Small and Alive that lasted. There was only one rung left, and it had a saint standing on it, and the only way out was through. So we didn't run. We did the thing we decided around a wobbly table a lifetime and 3 tiers ago. We went up into the most rigged fight of my life, on my enemy's stage, exactly as planned. His plan. And though he didn't know it yet, mine. They'd saved the best theater for last. The grand climax of the trials filled the largest arena Longhai had, every upper house in attendance, the tiers stacked with gold and the air thick with the particular excitement of rich people about to watch someone else's disaster. And at the center of it, finally off the leash Cao had kept him on all season, stood the champion. His name was Dorvan, they called him the Unbeaten, and the record wasn't marketing, dozens of wins, not a loss anywhere on it. Here's the part Cao was counting on, and I was counting differently. Dorvan had crossed into Saint only this season, freshly, violently arrived at the realm above Grandmaster, and every win on that perfect record had been earned on the way up, below the height he now stood at. A new saint with an old champion's certainty, and none of the scars that teach a man where his ceiling cracks. He was still a saint, and that was no small thing. On raw power he stood a clear cut above Yuna and Su Yin both, and everyone in that arena knew it. But there's a difference between a wall that's held against everything and a wall that's simply never been hit. Cao had built a fortress and put a saint in the doorway, certain it was unbreakable. I've spent my whole life learning that unbreakable is just the word people use right before I find the seam. I took my place at the rail and counted the eyes, because in a room like that the eyes tell you the real stakes. Cao Rui sat front and high in the gold, relaxed for the first time in weeks, a man watching a problem about to solve itself. The patron sat apart as she always does, and she wasn't watching the champion or my fighters. She was watching me, the way you watch a kettle you've put on, waiting to see what I'd do when the pressure came, and whether I'd reach for the forbidden valve again. Somewhere down in the cheap, distant tiers, I knew without looking, the Zhao family's bought eyes were watching too, ready to carry word of our death back to a patriarch who'd waited a long time for it. Every faction that wanted a piece of me had gathered in one building to watch a saint take that piece on their behalf. The whole city had run the arithmetic and reached the same comfortable answer it always does about the leech. I let them have it. There is no disguise in the world as good as everyone's certainty that you're about to lose. The bout opened and we lost on purpose for the first 90 seconds. I'd planned it that way, though I hadn't told Yuna and Su Yin much more than they needed, because the best bait is bait that doesn't know it's bait. Against a saint, you cannot win the fight you're supposed to fight. He's stronger at everything, and trading blows just means losing in order. So we didn't trade. Yuna and Su Yin gave ground, probed, took small hits, and let Dorvan do the one thing undefeated men cannot help doing: get comfortable. Every easy exchange taught him this was the kind of fight he'd won 100 times. Every step back we took, he read as the gap he'd expected. And all the while I watched from the rail, not spending a drop of the reserve I'd spent weeks rebuilding, reading him the way I'd read Brightspear a lifetime ago, only slower, more careful, because a saint's blind spot is smaller and costs more to reach. He had one. They always do. Confidence is just a blind spot a man has decided to be proud of. I waited for him to show me where his lived. Here's the thing Cao Rui never understood because he buys blades one at a time. I don't field fighters. I field a combination. The seam showed itself the way I'd hoped. Dorvan, certain now, committed to putting Yuna down and turned his shoulder a fraction off Su Yin to do it. That fraction was the whole plan. Su Yin hit the opening with everything the last weeks had made her, and at the exact instant she did, Tan's contribution went to work. A reagent I'd had him build for one fight, fed to both women that morning, that didn't make them stronger so much as let them push one beat past the moment a body says stop. Two blades moving as a single argument, in a window a solo fighter could never have pried open, Yuna driving Dorvan's guard, Su Yin punishing the turn, neither of them where the saint expected anyone to be. He bled. First blood to us, clean and undeniable, and the arena made a sound I'd waited all season to hear from the upper tier. Surprise. The kind that means a room full of certain people just felt their certainty slip. We hadn't won. But for the first time, Dorvan the unbeaten knew he was in a fight. A saint doesn't stay surprised for long. That's what makes him a saint. Dorvan recalibrated between one breath and the next, stopped underestimating the two women in front of him, and the fight tilted back hard. Now he fought them as the real threats they were, and at full attention a true saint is a different and far worse animal. Yuna took a hit that cracked something. Su Yin's perfect tandem began to fray under a speed they couldn't match twice. And then, because Cao Rui has never once trusted a fair fight he'd already rigged, the cheat came. An official's call that went against us at the worst moment. A planted distraction in the stands timed to pull Su Yin's eye. The small, dirty thumb on the scale great houses keep ready for the exact moment their sure thing stops being sure. The combination that had drawn blood was coming apart. My fighters were hurt and slowing. And I felt the old pull, the one I'd sworn off in the dark, the valve, the dust in the deeper ledger, the voice that said you could cross the sand again, you could fix this with a piece of yourself. High in the gold, the patron leaned forward. She felt it too. She was waiting to watch me reach. Yuna went down. Not the way Su Yin had gone down against Vol, not a maiming but hard. A blow that put her on a knee with blood in her mouth and Dorvan stepping in to end it, and every nerve I owned screamed the same word it had screamed in that other arena. Spend. Cross the sand. Be the weapon. Save her. My hand was already on the rail. The dust was already there in the deeper ledger, enough for one more impossible second, and a second was all it would take. And the patron was watching me find that exact thought with the patience of a woman who already knew how this ended, because she'd seen me end it this way once before. And that, her certainty, is what stopped me. Because the moment I crossed that rail, I wasn't Jin anymore. I was her experiment confirmed, her acquisition delivered, a man who solves the unsolvable by feeding himself into it until there's nothing left to collect. I'd made a rule in the dark. I'd told Yuna some things you don't get to put on the ledger, so I took my hand off the rail, and I trusted the machine I'd built instead of the wound I'd become. It was the hardest thing I have ever not done. Instead of spending myself, I spent the reserve, the real one, rebuilt scrap by scrap for weeks while everyone thought I was just licking wounds. But here's the part that makes it mine and not Cao's kind of victory. I didn't dump it. A bigger number doesn't beat a saint. He has bigger numbers than I'll ever afford. I spent it like a scalpel, the way I'd spent that first withdrawal on Brightspear a lifetime ago, except now I had two blades and a plan and a champion who just made the mistake undefeated men make. He'd committed everything to finishing Yuna, certain she was done. She wasn't done. I put the reserve into her at the exact instant Dorvan's blade came down, not enough to overpower him, just enough to let a woman on one knee be somewhere she should not have been able to be, and Su Yin, freed for one breath by Yuna becoming bait, drove into the opening the saint had left to kill the jinx he thought he'd already beaten. The whole fight, the whole season, the whole climb came down to that. Not the biggest number. The right one, spent at the right second on the people I'd built. The machine worked, It always works when I let it. It was Yuna who landed it in the end. Of course it was. Su Yin pried the saint open, but the blade that went home was Yuna's, because some things the universe owes a person, and this was one of them. The woman they'd called Jinx, the cursed one, the bad luck charm two cowards had built their careers on burying. She rose off the knee where a saint had put her and finished the unbeaten in front of every powerful eye in Longhai. I'd thought a lot that season about what I was fighting for, and watching Yuna stand over Dorvan with the whole gold tier silent, I finally had it clean. Not the climb, not the dynasty even though I'll never stop saying so. This. The exact look on her face, not triumph. Yuna doesn't do triumph, but something quieter and harder one. The look of a person who has just made the world take back a lie it told about her out loud, where it can never be unsaid. 2 years they'd called her unlucky. She'd just become the luckiest thing that ever happened to a leech, and she'd done it standing up. Dorvan the Unbeaten lost his name on the sand that day, and he lost it cleanly. No fluke, no jinx, no excuse a house could spin into a footnote. 2 blades, a plan, a reagent, and a single precise withdrawal had taken apart a saint in front of 1,000 witnesses, and the most important of those witnesses sat in House Cao gold. There's a specific silence a great house makes when its sure thing dies in public. It's the sound of a brand cracking. Cao had paraded Dorvan all season as the proof of everything they were. That power is a thing you buy, stack, and point. That talent without a house behind it is just noise the houses get to silence. And my noise had just silenced their proof live, with the whole city watching the receipt get signed. The officials in Cao's pocket couldn't find a call to make. The crowd that had gathered to watch a leech die had instead watched a saint fall, and a crowd will forgive you many things, but never being wrong in an interesting direction. The win wasn't ours to take in the end. They had to give it. That's the only kind that ever really sticks. The same arithmetic that had written us off flipped in the span of a held breath, because the upper tier doesn't have loyalties, only positions, and our position had just changed. The houses that had frozen us out leaned forward. The officials who'd gone formal found their warmth again. Somewhere a vendor was probably already selling Yuna's likeness, the way they had down in the slums a lifetime ago, except up here the markup would be obscene. I watched it happen from the rail, the recalculation rippling through the gold tiers. 1,000 powerful people quietly revising their estimate of what a leech and his blades were worth, and worth to whom. A month ago the eyes that mattered had looked at us and seen a coffin with our names on it. Now they looked and saw an asset, an ally, a threat, an opportunity, every flavor of useful. It should have felt like winning, and it did mostly. But I'd been poor too long not to notice the thing under it. We hadn't escaped being something other people priced. We just graduated to a more expensive shelf. Fame, it turns out, is the same warning at every altitude. It only gets louder the higher you climb. I made a point of finding Cao Rui's face in the moment it broke, because I'm not entirely a good person, and some debts you collect in expressions. He didn't take it the way Dorvan had. The saint had lost with a kind of grace, a man who'd met something stronger and could respect the machine that beat him. Cao Rui had no such machinery in him. I watched the bored heir who'd filed me as a clerical error sit in his gold and discover, in front of every peer whose opinion he'd been raised to need, that he was the one who'd been mispriced all along. There was no reassessment on his face, no grudging respect, none of the growth that might have made him interesting. Only fury, the specific, curdled fury of a man handed everything who has just lost to someone with nothing, and who will never, ever forgive the arithmetic of it. He met my eyes across the arena. I didn't gloat, I'd learned that lesson. I just held the look long enough to let him understand that I knew exactly what he was now, not a great house's heir, a sore loser with a great house's resources, the most dangerous kind of enemy there is and the easiest to bait. He'd be back. Men like Cao Rui always come back. That's fine. I keep a column in the ledger just for them. For Su Yin, the win meant something it didn't mean for the rest of us, and I made sure she got to have it whole. House Cao had spent years telling her exactly what she was. An asset, a tool, a talent too inconvenient to free and too valuable to waste, a girl whose victories belonged to a crest on a collar. And she just helped take apart that house's greatest champion in front of the entire upper tier, not as Cao property, not as anyone's blade but her own, standing beside people who'd valued her correctly from the first day. Whatever standing the trials conferred on the climax victors, she'd earned a full share, in her own name, on the public record where Cao could never quietly file it away again. I watched her realize it, watched the woman who'd worn a gilded leash understand that she'd just become someone no house could ever shelve, because the whole city had seen what she was worth. She didn't thank me. She'd already made her vow, and Su Yin doesn't repeat herself. She just looked at the crest on Cao Rui's box, then at the empty place at her own throat where a collar used to sit, and allowed herself, for the first time since I'd known her, to smile. Down in the cheap tiers, the Zhao family's bought eyes watched the whole thing and then, I imagine, went very quietly to find a way to tell the patriarch that the Leech and the Jinx had not, in fact, died on schedule, that they'd instead climbed onto the highest stage in the city and humiliated a great house in front of everyone who matters. Mei Lin confirmed it later. The proxy who dogged us all season, the official taking Zhao and Cao coin both, simply stopped. There was no point anymore. The Zhao family's whole leverage had been that we were small, deniable, reachable, a stain you could quietly wipe before it spread. We weren't reachable now. You don't send a hired knife after people the entire upper tier just watched win. The math that made us cheap to kill had inverted into the math that made us expensive to touch. The grudge wasn't gone, a patriarch like that doesn't forgive, he files, but it had been shelved, the way you shelve a debt you can no longer afford to collect. We'd climbed clean out of the grave they dug for us. It only took becoming too valuable to bury, which, now that I think about it, was the plan from the very first rooftop. Funny how that works. Let me close the books on the climb because the books are, as ever, the best part. Going in, I'd had a reserve rebuilt from scratch and a body still paying installments on a debt I'd sworn never to take again. Coming out, two fighters who just leveled by beating a saint, and beating a saint forces growth the way nothing else can, so the tribute came in not as a trickle but as a flood, the single biggest haul of my life, both streams running hot at once. The ledger that had bled red for weeks didn't just recover. It broke its own ceiling. I sat there at the rail doing the math while the crowd roared, and the math was absurd, a fever dream. I was, by any measure that counted up here, suddenly wealthy, in the one currency only I can see, richer than I'd ever been, getting richer by the second off two people who'd chosen me. Today's haul, one fallen saint, one humiliated great house, two enemies shelved, a partner avenged and a partner freed, and a leech who walked into the most rigged fight of his life and walked out compounding. I told them at the very start, I don't win fights. I build dynasties. Today the dividends all came in at once. The real celebration happened later, away from the gold and the roar, in the cheap private back room of a place that didn't ask questions. The whole network, what was left of the wobbly table empire, gathered around a table that wobbled just as badly as the first one. Bao, leg still splinted, holding court about a fight he hadn't been in. Tan, permitting himself exactly one cup of something and one rare, creased smile at the reagent that had worked. Mei Lin, totting up our suddenly enormous market value and forgetting to charge me for the evening. Su Yin, free, arguing forms with Yuna like they'd been doing it for years. And Yuna catching my eye across the wobble, raising her cup half an inch, our whole private language in a gesture. I looked at all of them, the strays and outcasts and thrown-away talents the great houses couldn't see the worth of, and let myself feel the thing I'd spent the season too busy to feel. Cao bought the best blades money could find and lost to a handful of people the world discarded, because the difference between a stable of assets and a family is that one of them will stand on a broken leg to watch you win. Network is power. I'd been saying it like a strategy. Turns out it was also just true. We got one evening. One. I should have known better than to enjoy a clean ending because in my experience the bill doesn't wait for the celebration to finish. It just lets you order dessert first. The patron's summons came the next morning, and it didn't come as an invitation this time, or a carriage, or a line of silver text being polite about it. It came as a fact. The trials were over. We'd won. And under the rules I'd been so glad to use against Cao, winning under her patronage meant exactly what she'd told me it would on the first day. In words I'd been too busy surviving to fully price. And what you become while you climb, she'd left the number blank. Now she'd come to fill it in. I'd spent the whole season beating the enemy in front of me and telling myself the leash around my neck was a problem for later. Later, as I'd noted once, is exactly where the dangerous numbers like to hide. The climb was over. The collecting was about to begin. And walking up to that glass room in the sky, I realized I'd been so focused on not becoming the patron's experiment that I'd missed the simpler trap. I'd already become her investment. And investments get called in. To be fair to the patron, and I try to be fair to my enemies, it keeps the estimates accurate. She paid out before she collected. What she offered in that glass room was real, and it was enormous. A seat, formal patronage under her house, the protection that came with it, a rung on the ladder that Cao and Zhao and the whole lower world simply could not reach. We weren't trespassers in the upper tier anymore. We were residents, with a name above ours that meant the gutter could no longer touch us. For a kid who'd started this as a zero in a reaping line, it was everything I'd schemed toward from the first rooftop. The network with real standing, the dynasty with an actual foundation under it, Yuna and Su Yin and all of them safe in a way they'd never been in their lives. She laid it out like a gift, and the maddening thing is that it was one. Genuinely. I'd climbed the whole mountain and reached the top, and the view was exactly as good as I'd hoped, which is precisely when you should check your pockets. Because nobody hands you the summit for free. They hand it to you because, from up here, you're finally close enough to be useful for whatever they actually wanted all along. Then she told me what I'd cost, and she told me by telling me what I was for. She didn't explain all of it. She's far too good a player to spend a card she can hold, but she gave me the shape, the way she'd given me the shape of everything all season, one deliberate inch at a time. There is a thing she has been building toward for a very long time, something her house needs, and the established powers of this world would burn her to the ground for attempting. And it requires at its center the one impossibility she'd spent years hunting and finally found bleeding on an arena floor, an unawakened who can generate power, me. Not my fighters, not my network, those were the proof, the audition, the way she made sure the thing she'd bet on was real before she spent her own neck on it. You climbed beautifully, little host, she said, but you didn't climb to a seat, you climbed to a purpose. Mine. She didn't say what the purpose was. She didn't have to yet. She just let me feel the new shape of the leash, not a thing that kept me safe from Cao anymore, but a thing that pointed me at whatever she'd been aiming at since the first card on a wobbly table. The villain of my next chapter, I understood, had been my benefactor all along. They usually are. I walked out of that glass room with everything I'd climbed for and the distinct sensation of a door clicking shut behind me. Here's the trade I'd made, laid out plain now that it was too late to unmake it. Down in the gutter I'd been free and worthless, which is its own kind of safety. Nobody owns what nobody wants. Up here I was valuable and owned, the exact inverse, and I'd swapped one for the other rung by rung, telling myself each step was just survival. The leash hadn't loosened as I climbed. It had shortened. Down there the patron needed a card to reach me. Now she had a seat with my name on it and a purpose with my body at the center of it. Cao had wanted to break me and failed. The patron had wanted to keep me and succeeded, and the difference between those two, I was only now understanding, is that the enemy who wants you dead is a problem you can win, while the one who wants you useful is a problem you have to outlast. I'd traded a coffin for a cage. By every measure it was an upgrade. It was also still a cage, and I have never in my life met a cage I didn't eventually intend to pick the lock of. But I want to be clear, because my narration's been grim for a stretch, and that's not the whole truth of how I felt walking down from that tower. I wasn't afraid. I was interested. The patron had made exactly one mistake in her flawless season of moving me around her board, and it was the same mistake everyone makes about a man with no power. She'd confused owning my circumstances with owning me. She held my seat, my safety, my purpose, all the visible pieces. What she didn't hold, what nobody has ever managed to hold, was the only thing I've ever actually owned. The fact that I see the board. She thinks she's acquired a tool. She's actually acquired a partner who hasn't told her he's a partner yet, one who's now inside her house under her protection, close enough to finally learn what she's really building, and patient enough to wait until he can use it. I'm still the armory. I'll always be the armory. It's the truest thing about me. But the armory just got moved into the castle, and a man who arms other people for a living, given time and proximity and a quiet ledger only he can read, can arm himself against anyone, even the person who thinks they hold his leash, especially them. Not everything that season was a ledger entry, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't try to file it that way at first. The network had become something I didn't have a column for. Yuna, who'd started as a contract and a calculation, was now the person who closes the books and takes them out of my hands when the math turns cruel. And somewhere in there, between the wobbly tables and the dark rooms and the things we survived, the contract had quietly become something neither of us has been brave enough to name out loud, and both of us have stopped pretending isn't there. Su Yin, fierce and freed, watches me now with a complication I recognize and am in no hurry to resolve, because the entire point of how I do this is that nobody is ever rushed or owned, least of all in that. Whatever is growing between the three of us, and it is growing slowly, the way the best things do gets to grow at its own pace, freely chosen, or it isn't worth having. So I'll do for it what I do for anything I respect too much to cheapen. Give it time, privacy, and exactly one tasteful fade too. And we'll pick that up another time. Some things even I don't put on the page. Meanwhile, the report that frightened officer ran off to file did exactly what reports do. It traveled. Mei Lin caught the echo of it weeks later, and it wasn't good. Word of the jinx's resurrection, of Yuna, alive, risen, standing over a fallen saint in the upper tier where everyone who matters watched, had climbed all the way to the people who buried her in the first place. Commander Wei, the man whose reckless call killed her squad and whose lie killed her name, is a commander still, more powerful now than when he ruined her. And Ren, who stole her glory and spread the smear, sits on the association board these days, comfortable, decorated, exactly the kind of man who does not enjoy learning that a secret he buried 2 years ago has crawled out of its grave and made itself famous. They'd spent a long time being safe. Yuna's climb had just made them less so. I didn't tell her the full shape of it. She had enough new enemies without me handing her the old ones before their time. But I marked it in the column that's been waiting patiently since the night she first told me what they'd done to her. That debt is coming due. Not this chapter, but it's coming. The warning came from the unlikeliest place, Captain Mun, the one man from Yuna's old life who never quite managed to live with what he'd signed. He reached us through a back channel, nervous, glancing over his shoulder the way men do when they're betraying the powerful to do one decent thing too late. He'd survived the expedition Wei got killed. He'd signed the false report that buried Yuna, and he'd spent 2 years choking on it. Now he'd risked a great deal to send a single message: stay hidden. He'd heard the talk among the people who close ranks, that Yuna's rise wasn't being received up there as an inspiring story but as a problem, a loose thread 2 careers had been built on cutting, and that the establishment had ways of dealing with loose threads that made even a great house look gentle. They closed ranks once to bury her, his message read. They'll do it again, and they're bigger than whatever you've climbed into. It was good information, honestly given, and I thanked him for it. But Mun had made the same error the whole city keeps making about us. He thought the answer to powerful enemies was to stay small. We'd tried small. Small is just a slower coffin. The only way out has only ever been up. And then, the morning everything was supposed to settle into our hard-won new normal, the board changed again, because that's the other thing nobody warns you about winning. Each win just qualifies you for a larger game. She arrived without ceremony, which is its own kind of ceremony when you're powerful enough to skip it. A woman in the coat of a high-rank hunter-commander, the real article, the kind of authority that makes a great house's heir look like the spoiled child he is. The whole upper tier rearranged itself around her the moment she walked in, the way iron filings find a magnet. Mei Lin went pale pulling her file, and Mei Lin does not go pale. Commander Lan. A name spoken in the registers reserved for people the city is genuinely afraid of, not a house's bought muscle, not a patron's velvet leash, but state power, earned and sharp, the establishment itself given a face and a sword. She wasn't an opportunity dressed as a threat, like the patron, or a threat too stupid to be won, like Cao. She was simply, unmistakably, the next tier of the mountain, arrived in person, and every instinct I owned told me she had come for us. She came straight at me, which told me something already. Powerful people who skip the scheming have either decided you're beneath it or worth too much to waste the time. With Lan, I genuinely couldn't tell which, and not being able to read someone is, for me, roughly the sensation a normal person gets at the edge of a great height. "You're the one," she said, not a question. "The Unawakened who took apart a saint and a great house with a stable of cast-offs." I allowed that the rumor had been generous. She didn't smile. "The rumor," she said, "is the reason I'm here. There are people who want to use what you are. There are people who want to bury it. I haven't yet decided which is the greater mistake." And that was all she gave me, no faction named, no demand made, just the flat fact of her attention and the deliberate, infuriating ambiguity of a player who wanted me to know she was at the table now without showing me a single card. Threat or opportunity? The patron's rival or her ally? The next cliff or the next ledge? She'd come to set exactly that question in front of me and then walk away leaving it unanswered, which is precisely what I'd have done. I dislike meeting people who scheme like me. It's so much harder to win. The two of them in the same city, both circling me, was the part that kept me up that night doing math with no numbers in it. The patron had spent a season and a fortune acquiring me for a purpose she still hadn't fully named, a purpose the established powers would burn her for. And here was the establishment, arrived in the person of Commander Lan, sniffing at the same impossibility from the opposite direction. I didn't know yet whether Lan had come because she'd caught the scent of what the patron was building, or whether she was hunting me for her own reasons, or whether, and this was the thought that actually interested me, the two women were already players in a game against each other, and I'd just been dropped into the middle of it as the most valuable and least informed piece on the board. A man with no power survives by knowing things other people don't. For the first time in a long while, I was the thing other people knew about and I didn't. Two powers wanted what I am. One held my leash, one held my measure, and somewhere between them was a gap. There's always a gap that a patient leech with a long memory and a quiet ledger might, given time, learn to live in. The next climb wasn't going to be a mountain. It was going to be a tightrope, strung between two people far stronger than me, over a drop I couldn't see the bottom of. I started this whole story on a rooftop at dawn, telling you the one thing nobody warns you about winning, that it's the most dangerous thing you can do, that invisible is safe, and that I'd traded invisible for famous, prey too small for prey worth the bother. Well, here's the update from a considerably nicer rooftop. We won. We climbed the whole mountain, beat the heir and the saint and the great house, freed the caged and nearly avenged the wronged, and planted a dynasty's first real foundation in the gold where the gutter can never reach it. And I am, at this exact moment, more hunted than I have ever been in my life. The Zhao family wanted me dead when I was a nobody. Now a great house hates me, a patron owns me, the establishment is measuring me, and the most dangerous woman in the city has personally informed me she hasn't decided whether to use me or bury me. 31 days and a lifetime ago, I was a zero in a line, too worthless to scheme against. I climbed and made myself worth the bother, then worth the war, and now, congratulations to me, I'm worth the attention of people who could end me with a sentence. Visible was always going to mean hunted. I just hadn't appreciated how much the view improves on the way up, or how much farther there is to fall. Yuna found me on that rooftop, of course. She always knows where I go to do my thinking. She looked out at the gold city we'd bled our way into, then at me, and asked the question she'd asked once before, a lifetime and 3 tiers ago, when all I had was a black card and a bad idea. "So," she said, "what now?" Down there in the slums, the honest answer had been a single word, and she'd been the one to say it. Up here, with a patron's purpose pointed at my back and a commander's shadow falling across the only road forward and a great house nursing a grudge below, the answer was more complicated and far more dangerous, and somehow, I'll be honest, exactly as exhilarating. I thought about the tightrope, and the two powers at either end of it, and the gap between them where a man like me might learn to live. I thought about everyone asleep in the house behind us who'd chosen this, chosen me, and what I owed them now that the climbing was supposed to be done. And I gave Yuna the only answer a leech who builds dynasties has ever really had, the one that started all of this and isn't finished yet. I looked up. At the next tier, the next power, the next impossible thing they'd all agreed I couldn't reach. "Now," I said, "we keep climbing." Cut to black. Roll the part where you wonder what happens next. I'm wondering too, that's the fun.